This is Trouble, and it's one of the most iconic board games of all time. Originally created by the Kohner brothers, it was manufactured by Irwin Toy in 1965. In subsequent years, the rights changed hands from Gabriel to Ideal to present-day Hasbro. So today we're going to compare this 1980 Ideal edition of Trouble to the present-day 2019 Hasbro edition of Trouble, and we're going to see what's changed and what's stayed the same over the course of about 40 years. So to get started, let's have a look at box art. Now, this is very traditional as far as showing the board on the front of the box, but one thing that's very unique is this cutout to show the iconic Pop-O-Matic that makes Trouble so famous here. So again, great marketing, looks wonderful, very colorful box, very easy to spot. When we flip it over, this is something I'm really fond of. We have the instructions printed right on the back of the box. Makes it very easy, you're not gonna lose them, you can just flip it over. If you're shopping for the game and you're unsure about if it's gonna be too complicated, you can flip it right over, see how the game is played, and be sure that you're making an educated purchase. So I think that's really nice. It is a two-piece box, which I am a fan of two-piece game boxes for ease of storage. However, with this cutout up front for the Pop-O-Matic, there is some space for these little pegs to weasel out and run away. And as you can see, over the years, one of the blue ones already has. Now, I always like to show off a complete set here, and they're very close to the pegs, but there are some differences in how the pegs are molded, so we'll get to that in a moment. Anyway, forgive the missing peg here for the sake of educational purposes. Now, on to the 2019 edition game box. This is a lot more colorful. It doesn't really give you a great idea of the board, even though anybody who's familiar with the game knows that this is a depiction of the game board. Because we don't have a photo or a scale map of the board, this is just kind of a loose artistic idea. However, that being said, as an artistic expression of the game Trouble, I think this definitely holds water. I like that this is very colorful. When we flip it over, then we get our representation of the board. So we do actually get to see from the outside what the board looks like, but no rules printed on the outside of the pack. Those are enclosed within. So we'll get to those later. Anyway, one thing is this package is a lot lighter and it is a flip top. So again, you're gonna wanna get like a Ziploc bag or something to make sure that your little pegs don't run away over time. And there is a cutout for the Pop-O-Matic. Now, of course, over time, the Pop-O-Matic has shrunk by a very small amount. And so there's also a little cardboard space saver that comes with this package. It goes around the Pop-O-Matic, and I highly recommend that you hold on to it for storage purposes, as it'll make it easier to keep these little pegs inside the box and from running away if you don't have a plastic bag. Anyway, both boxes have a cutout to show off the iconic Pop-O-Matic, and historically, when you look at how Trouble was sold, I think almost every single manufacturer from Irwin to Gabriel to Ideal to Hasbro, they have all had a cutout in the front of the package to show off the Pop-O-Matic. So let's get to it. Let's get to the game board here. Why is the Pop-O-Matic important? Well, actually, for gameplay purposes, it's not 100% necessary, but I think it's a really nice way to incorporate it into this plastic design for the game board. Now, this game is actually not too original. People accuse Trouble of being a ripoff of earlier games such as Pachisi that all involve moving either pawns or marbles around a board from a start to a home space with the ability to send opponents back to their home space if you land on them or jump them or other variations of such rules. So what really makes Trouble unique is its simplified rule set and this Pop-O-Matic. Now, of course, the tagline for the Pop-O-Matic as far as why it's necessary is to prevent players from possibly cheating and to keep you from losing the die. But considering that almost every package this game has ever been sold with has had a cutout in the front for the Pop-O-Matic, and they all come with these little tiny pegs that can run away through that cutout, I don't know why I'd be more worried about losing the die but not care about the game pieces. So realistically, that's a whole line, and the reality of why the Pop-O-Matic is so awesome is it's incredibly fun to use, and it fits in so nicely with this game board. How it works is there's a small metal plate on the underside of the game board. When you press this free-floating plastic dome that's held in place by the rest of the plastic game board base, it depresses that piece of metal. When you release, pops, just like the lid of a jar, and that little die inside rolls around. Now, what's unique about this die, this is interesting here, is all editions except for the travel edition of Trouble use Arabic numerals 1 through 6 instead of little pips like you might see on a traditional die. So that's kind of unique. I don't know why the travel edition is known for having the little pips, but every other edition of Travel has featured these Arabic numerals. Also on this 1980 edition, you may notice that the inside of the Pop-O-Matic looks kind of like it's discolored in a brown color, as opposed to the ambering that you see on the rest of the plastic, which is traditional for one of these clear acrylics when it's sat over time. Well, that's because this die in here is actually made of wood, and over time and use of the Pop-O-Matic, and this has been a well-loved game, the paint on the outside of that die has wore off, and little bits of wood powder have started to get out inside of the Pop-O-Matic. So unfortunately for the manufacturing that Ideal had put into this, perhaps trying to save money by using a wooden die, in the end sort of bit them as far as the longevity of the game board. The pegs here that the players get to use are very nice, very sturdy, and actually compared to the Hasbro 2019 edition, they're almost identical in size. You can actually interchange them pretty nicely on the board and not have any trouble. A big difference that I notice is on the Ideal one, there's this little inscription, this little character with a party hat and a K. So there's a little picture on top of these pegs that's unique to the Ideal 1980 edition. As opposed to the Hasbro, which is a little bit more of a generic smooth top with a small hole in there. I'm assuming just more for either removing it out of the mold or simply to allow it to insert and retract from the board easier as like a ventilation thing, or maybe like a Bic pen cap. It's a choking hazard mitigation. So number of possibilities for it. Doesn't really make an aesthetic change that I'm worried about. Most likely, now that I think about it, it's probably a choking hazard thing, but who knows? It's all speculation. If anybody from Hasbro wants to answer that and has seen this video, I'd love it if you commented and let us know here. Anyway, getting back to the 1980 Ideal edition, you can see the art is, well, this looks like 1980 in a nutshell. I love the text choice for the titling on Trouble here. You've got the Ideal branding. The board, as far as the lap, is signified again by each character's respective colored quadrant. Each player needs to move a peg initially to their start space and then around the board to their home space. How they do that is they'll take turns hitting the Pop-O-Matic. In the original rule set that's implemented in the 1980 edition, in order for a player to take a peg out of their home position, they must roll a 6, which I can't really do on cue, and obviously shows why it's a bit of a challenge. A 6 allows a player to also take an additional move, so if they're bringing a peg out, they can again roll again to advance their pawn around the map. If they happen to land on an opponent's pawn, that opponent's pawn is sent back home. So you can see where the chase is on and the competition begins. As players make their way around the board, they'll be competing to get double rolls by rolling a 6 or landing on their opponents to send their opponents home. Once a character gets its peg into the finish zone, by hitting the finish line there, their peg is safe. The object is to be the first person to get all 4 pegs into your finish zone. So very simple Trouble instructions. The rule set for this is largely unchanged from the 1965 release. Anyway, very nice looking board. As you can see, compared to the modern edition, it's actually about the same size. Like I said, the pegs are darn near interchangeable. One of the only differences in the mold is how the Pop-O-Matic is implemented. The dome on this 1980 edition is significantly taller than the 2019 edition's Pop-O-Matic. Let me see if I'm dexterous enough to pick these both up and hold them almost at eye level there, so you can see it's about 1/4 of an inch higher. So interesting. I'm not sure, I mean, the die in here is smaller, but I'm not sure if that extra loft makes a huge difference in how the die rolls. This appears to roll just fine, and it's a very robust pop, which is awesome. So the 1980 edition, there we go, going on to the 2019 Hasbro. One of the first things I want to point out, you might have noticed as I try to handle this board and the 1980 edition, it's kind of grabbing on the table. That's because there's 4 rubber feet on the bottom of this board in the 2019 edition. And that's a nice touch. I'm glad that Hasbro added. So quality of life bonus, Hasbro added rubber feet to Trouble. What a technological advancement. So there we go. There's 40 years right there. Largely, the actual game board is unchanged, save for art style. The die is still in Arabic numerals. However, in this instance, it's a plastic die inside of a slightly smaller Pop-O-Matic, but it still has a nice, strong, snappy pop that's really enjoyable. The instructions as far as the start space, the finish line, all very clearly printed. Now you might notice at the halfway point between each color's quadrant, you're going to see these spaces here that have these little X's. So the rule set has changed in the 2019 edition. There are a few things that are different. So players still attempt to roll a 6. Oh, I got one on cue. That's great. You have photographic evidence right there. If a player pops a 6, they can move their character onto the start space and take their second turn. If a player pops a 1, that means that they cannot move, but their opponents may bring a peg out from their home space onto a start space and begin navigating around the board. If you land on one of these spaces, this is called a double trouble space, and it gives you a second turn. If you're already operating on a second turn from having rolled a 6 previously, you cannot have another second turn or a third. So on any given turn, you're allowed to get a double if you roll a 6 or land on here, but not both. So the new rule set basically helps you bring opponents out by accident by rolling a 1. It nullifies your ability to move on 1 as well, so it kind of restricts motion around the board in a very minimal way. However, by adding that extra little bit of competition of bringing your opponents onto the board, it speeds up gameplay. The other thing is these little double trouble spaces where you get an extra turn also speed up gameplay. So I found that if you're playing by the 1980 rule set, this is a lot slower game, a lot less intense. It's a bit tougher to get your pegs out, and because it's a bit tougher to get your pegs out of the home position and onto the board and in rotation, there's a lot less confrontation between players. So I find that with the 2019 rule set, we've sped up the game and we've also increased the likelihood of confrontation between players to increase competitiveness. So I can see where the 2019 edition is really good if you want to feel like you're using more strategy or you want to feel like there's more action involved. I actually think both rule sets are nice. There's nothing saying that you can't play by the older rule set on the newer game. It'd be a little tougher to do the reverse, and actually when we got this 1980 edition and went to recondition it, somebody had used a Sharpie to mark these middle places which serve as the double trouble on the new game. So whoever had this was aware of the new rule set as well. So I'd be interested to see, for instance, if the Gabriel Toys version had the double trouble option or if that's purely a Hasbro creation. But either way, don't confuse this with the board game Double Trouble, which is a spin-off from Trouble. This is simply just the Double Trouble spot on the game. Again, the game boards being about the same size and with the slight difference in the Pop-O-Matic, which I'm going to keep doing that anytime I have an excuse to do it because it's too fun not to. I don't see a significant drop in quality. If anything, I see what looks to be a safety measure implemented in this little vent hole on top of the peg. Unless I'm wrong, I don't know. I'm gonna credit it to what I think is the most logical thing there. The board is sturdy. The plastic on both of these feels really good. The underside on both of them is still kind of like a cardboard sheet material with the Pop-O-Matic metal affixed to it. So there's no real advancement or decline in production quality that I see, save for obviously this plastic die in the 2019 edition is going to hold up over the long run versus the wooden die, and as we can already see, it's beginning to degrade. I mean, here it's protected from mostly moisture, mostly air. It's still going to be pummeled, and it still could light bleach over time. So I'm not sure if that wood die is eventually going to completely degrade or if it's just going to continue to wear but still be usable. I mean, this is not going to last forever. It's just plastic, but curious to see how this would put up. But this was a well-loved piece, obviously, so I think we're seeing a prime example of a heavily used wooden die and what it put up with over 40 years. Either way, though, it's a great value when you're comparing both of them. A lot of times when I'm comparing an older edition to a newer edition, I gotta say, a lot of times I see a quality decline between the newer edition and the older edition, or in some way there's a cost-cutting measure implemented that changes the game in a way that is noticeable enough to be troubling, not necessarily to affect the gameplay, but fans of the original might catch on. Usually the last part of this, I like to go over the rule books. As we saw, the rules are printed on the back of the 1980 edition. When we get to the 2019 edition, there is an insert here, full color, sealed paper. I have no reason to believe that this is not going to hold up. I do have reason to believe that this would get lost significantly easier than losing the bottom portion of your box. So I'm going to go ahead and say, if I had to compare those features, win to the 1980 edition. Overall, when we're comparing them, I mean, it's very subtle differences as far as what you're missing and what you've gained. I like the new rule set. I think it makes the game fast and exciting. I don't see in any way how it would hurt to add the new rules, even within the art of the game, as if you're a stickler, you can go right back to the slower rule set just fine. So I think that this gives you more options for gameplay. I like the art on the 2019 edition. It's a lot brighter, it's a lot cleaner, it's a lot crisper. This is really neat when you look at it as a time capsule. This looks every bit like the year 1980. So when we go back to the Ideal Edition, it's not that I don't like it, but I'm gonna say that there's no reason why I would bring out the 1980 edition in lieu of the 2019 edition if I were bringing out Trouble to play with my friends. And actually, I think the biggest change would be those rubber feet that Hasbro added. That might be my biggest deciding factor, even over the rule set, is how nicely those rubber feet keep this board in place. So overall, I think that you could really go either way. It depends on what you feel of the rule set, but considering the low cost and the overall build quality of the 2019 Hasbro edition, I think this is great. I would consider it an upgrade. For all intents and purposes, I would say that the pieces are safer. The rubber feet keep it more stable. The plastic is just as strong as it ever was. The board is an update in visual appeal. I mean, look at this. It's nice, brightly colored. You can see every individual quadrant, and we have the updated rule set. So, hey, Trouble, 1980 versus 2019. What do you think of the differences? Comment below, let me know. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.